The recent visit of President Moon Jae-in to India has greatly stirred scholarly interest in the ancient cultural exchange between Korea and India. In this process, Gaya has been mentioned as a place of origin of Buddhism, and, together with the successive excavation of new materials through China's Northwest Project, a new clue to the origin of the name Gyeomgangsan has arisen. Although interest in Gyeomgangsan has been heightened by the unprecedented Gyeomgangsan fire, the present author has already, in 2016 at the Society for East Asian Ancient Studies, presented a paper on the origins of the etymology of Gyeomgangsan and Hoamsa, titled A Study of Pochin as a Center of Ancient East Asian Civilization. Whereas that earlier presentation was studied with its focus on the raising of the problem and the history of Pochin, this paper seeks to examine the etymology of Gyeomgangsan, the Damoval Bodhisattva, and the origins of Hoamsa on the basis of the newly discovered clues found through Gaya. Even before President Moon Jae-in's visit to India, many of today's Indian intellectuals had continually emphasized the exchange between the ancient civilizations of India and Korea. Already during the Japanese colonial period, the Indian poet Tagore, a Nobel laureate, referred to Korea as the lamp of Asia, puzzling Koreans, and the director of the Indian Museum, whom Dr. Kim Byung-no, an expert on Hwangok, who advocated the southern origin theory of the Korean people, visited during his time as a researcher, once mentioned the exchange between the ancient civilizations of India and Korea. The place name Gaya is likewise commonly mentioned in numerous places associated with Buddhist remains. Mentioning Gaya first in a paper on Gyeomgangsan is because Gaya plays a very important role in understanding Gyeomgangsan. If one seeks the most international place name in Korea connected with India from ancient times to the present, it would be Gyeomgangsan. As is well known, sightseeing at Gyeomgangsan was, from the time of the Yuan dynasty in the Goryeo period, a major gift for foreign envoys. That the Yuan court, which ruled the world, regarded Gyeomgangsan, the place most distant from India within Buddhism, the mainstream international culture of the Yuan period, as the Gyeomgangsan of the Avatamsaka Sutra, and that there were many visitors, is a problem that is very important in ancient cultural exchange, yet has not received sufficient attention, nor been clearly explained. The name Gyeomgangsan is a term derived from Buddhism, like the Buddhist scripture, the Diamond Sutra, or the Vajraketaka Prajnaparamita Sutra. The original name of the Heart Sutra, Gyeomgang, is commonly understood in the sense of a diamond because of Gyeomgangsik, which means diamond. But in fact, in Buddhism, Gyeomgang symbolizes enlightenment and wisdom, like a flash of lightning, derived from lightning. The Buddhist practice, commonly called Myungsim Densung, comes to mean the bright mind like lightning, and the mind nature that is the ground of the mind, so that Gyeomgang, that is, thunder, becomes the symbol of Buddhism. The origin of Gyeomgangsan's being designated as the Gyeomgangsan of the Avatamsaka Sutra is commonly regarded as the theory of Changguan, the renowned eminent monk of the Tang dynasty. However, Changguan's mention alone is insufficient to fully explain the exceptional case that Gyeomgangsan occupies in ancient culture. Gyeomgangsan, together with Baekdu-san, is for Koreans an object almost of faith in folk legend and belief, and continues to exert a great influence in national religions and the like down to the present. Yet the theoretical verification of its origin is still ongoing. This paper is a study that seeks to examine the origin of the etymology of Gyeomgangsan through Hoamsa near Pochin and the Damoval Bodhisattva. Hoamsa is the largest scale temple associated with the Damoval Bodhisattva of Gyeomgangsan, and, at the same time, also the temple most distant from it. Besides the name Gyeomgangsan, another link connecting Korea and India is the Bodhisattva. There are many research tasks related to the etymology of Bodhisattva. Together with the origin of the term bull, the origins of Buddhism's truly core terms remain obscure. This study of the origin of the name Gyeomgangsan seeks to examine, with its focus on tracing the etymologies of Bodhisattva and bull, newly illuminated through Gaya. If we examine the studies that survive to the present concerning the etymology of Gyam-Gangsan, they are broadly divided into the theory that it derives from the Dimuttal Bodhisattva of the Avatamsaka Sutra, and the theory that Gyam-Gangsan derives from Mount Sumeru. The widely known one is the theory related to the Dimuttal Bodhisattva, but the theory related to Mount Sumeru explains the part that the theory related to the Dimuttal Bodhisattva fails to account for. If we examine how the theory that it derives from the Dimuttal Bodhisattva of the Avatamsaka Sutra became a topic of discussion, this dates from the Joseon period. Dimuttal is a transliteration of the Sanskrit dharmogata, meaning to give rise to the Dharma. It signifies Buksung Biopyung, or Biopsung, and this is also called Bukji. Therefore the Dimuttal Bodhisattva is a transliteration of the Bukji Bodhisattva. According to the annals of the Joseon dynasty, when King Tajong asked his officials, whenever Chinese envoys come, they invariably wish to see Gyam-Gangsan. What is the reason for this? Haryan and others reported, it is because the story of Gyam-Gangsan is recorded in the Tripitaka, and has thus become widely known throughout the world. The name Gyam-Gangsan appears in the 80 fascicle Avatamsaka Sutra, a scripture slightly later than the 60 fascicle Avatamsaka Sutra, translated by Sixananda between 695 and 704 inches. In the midst of the sea there is Gyam-Gangsan, where bodhisattvas have dwelt since ancient times. Now the Bukji Bodhisattva resides there, dwelling together with more than 12,000 attendants and constantly preaching the Dharma. Since in this passage the Bukji Bodhisattva is a transliteration of the Dimuttal Bodhisattva, the Dimuttal Bodhisattva is sometimes identified as a real person of the Eastern Jin period. That is, an Indian prince is said to have actually practiced asceticism at Gyam-Gangsan in search of the Buddhist Dharma. Although the time of translation was 695 to 704, since the 60 fascicle Avatamsaka Sutra was translated in the Eastern Jin period, it is regarded as the Eastern Jin period. On the other hand, there are also many interpretations holding that Bukji, or the Dimuttal Bodhisattva, represents the exquisite, strangely shaped crags of Gyam-Gangsan, rather than being a real person. This is because there is no record that the Dimuttal Bodhisattva was actually at Gyam-Gangsan, and because the meaning of Bukji carries the sense of rising up like strangely shaped crags. If Bukji is a term expressing the appearance of Gyam-Gangsan, it may be more closely connected with the origin of the name Gyam-Gangsan. As regards the origin of Gyam-Gangsan, more meaning is contained in the term Bodhisattva than in the meaning of Dimuttal, and this the author seeks to clarify in the following chapter 3, Inches the Dimuttal Bodhisattva. The book that clearly presents the location of Gyam-Gangsan is the commentary on the Avatamsaka Sutra by Cheng Guan, a monk of Tang, China. According to him, to the east of the Eastern Sea, there is a mountain called Byam-Gang. It is not entirely gold, but from top to bottom and on all four sides, all the way up into the mountain valleys, there is gold within the flowing water and the sand. Viewed from afar, the whole may well be called gold. Moreover, the people of Hedong have transmitted from of old among themselves that on this mountain sages frequently appear. Gyam-Gangsan's coming to be venerated today as the Gyam-Gangsan of Buddhism is said to be traced to the 8th century Great Master Usung Minji, a civil official of the late Goryeo period, wrote in his records of the history of Yeojiamsa on Gyam-Gangsan according to old records of Silla, when the Dharma Master Usung first entered Ogazan and then reached Gyam-Gangsan, the Dimuttal Bodhisattva manifested himself and said to the master, Ogazan is a land where only those who have cultivation can escape the dust of the mundane world. In the Yeojiamsa section of the Dongguk Gyeolji Sunnam, there is transmitted a legend that the place where 53 Buddhas from the country of Wolji arrived at this shore riding an iron bell, and first settled was the site of Yeojiamsa. There is a record that in the time of Queen Jindik of Silla, there were 4 sacred sites, and that when the state decided great affairs, if they gathered at these sacred sites and deliberated, the matter would surely be accomplished. Gyam-Gangsan is included among these 4 sacred sites, but it is said that it is not known what historical events were plotted there. It may also be seen as the background to the tale of Prince Maui transmitted at Gyam-Gangsan. The great popularity of the Gyeomgangsan faith is regarded as belonging to the period of Yuan interference in the Goryeo period. The Gyeomgangsan faith flourished greatly during the period of Yuan interference. The Gyeomgangsan faith influenced not only Goryeo but also the neighboring Yuan dynasty, and at that time Gyeomgangsan is said to have been recognized as a Buddhist holy site of East Asia. Li Gok, a scholar and civil official of the period of Yuan interference in Goryeo, wrote in the Jangonsa stele. The Avatamsaka Sutra says that in the midst of the northeastern sea there is Gyeomgangsan, where the demudal bodhisattva, together with 12,000 bodhisattvas, is constantly expounding the prajna. Li Gok also described the frequent Buddhist services in that region brought about by the popularity of the Gyeomgangsan faith. The envoys of the Son of Heaven bringing incense and offerings lined the roads, and the gentlemen and ladies from all directions, not deeming a 1,000-li journey too far, came loading offerings on oxen and horses, carrying them on their backs, and bearing them on their heads, so that those who made offerings to the Buddha and the monks stood heel to heel. One may also cite the almsgiving made to Jangonsa on Gyeomgangsan by Empress Ji, famous as a figure who, having originated as a tribute woman of Goryeo, became the second empress of Emperor Shin of the Yuan. The story that, when Empress Ji at that time gave alms to Jangonsa on Gyeomgangsan, she said, "If one wishes to pray for blessings and repay heaven above, there is no place like Jangonsa on Gyeomgangsan," shows exactly the popularity of the Gyeomgangsan faith of that time, because Jangonsa, which had maintained relations with the Yuan imperial house from before, was located on Gyeomgangsan where the demudal bodhisattva permanently resided. Empress Ji chose Jangonsa as the most suitable temple for conducting Buddhist services to pray for the blessing of the emperor and her son. If we examine what is transmitted as records of visits by Yuan envoys, when Shulsan Sadong, a disciple of the eminent Yuan monk, Mongsan Dyogi, came to Goryeo in 1304, at the invitation of the Goryeo Buddhist community, one of the places he visited was Gyeomgangsan. Minji, who guided Shulsan Sadong to Gyeomgangsan at that time, recorded in his historical records that Gyeomgangsan was the abode of the demudal bodhisattva. Minji informs us that Chulsan's pilgrimage to Gyeomgangsan was carried out of faith in the demudal bodhisattva. Jigong, who founded Hoamsa, also designated the site of Hoamsa as a place of ascetic practice of a Buddha of the past, and visited Gyeomgangsan before building Hoamsa. When Jigong, a Yuan monk and the master of Naeomhyegun, royal preceptor of the late Goryeo period, visited Goryeo in 1326, Jigong passed through Gyeong and went straight into Gyeomgangsan, traveling about there for a month. The place Jigong sought at that time is said to have been the Bukji ritual site of Gyeomgangsan, that is, Yeojeomsa. The very naming of the ritual site as the Bukji ritual site informs us that Jigong paid his respects at Gyeomgangsan out of an expression of faith in the Bukji bodhisattva. The theory that the origin of the name Gyeomgangsan derives from the Avatamsaka Sutra shows well the documentary records and the historical flow. However, this theory regards the name Gyeomgang as having begun from the lightning and diamond of the god Vajra. Gyeomgang is an interpretation of the Sanskrit Vajraketaka, rendered by meaning, and its meaning is said to be cutting with a strong force like the Vajra. The Vajra is said to be like the thunderbolt of the god Indra. The meaning of the title Vajraketaka Prajnaparamita Sutra comes to mean the scripture of powerful wisdom that shatters discrimination, attachment, and defilements within the mind, and leads to enlightenment. The Sanskrit word Vajra is said originally to have been a word meaning both a thunderbolt and Gumgangsik at the same time. Since Gumgangsik has a more symbolic meaning than a thunderbolt, there is a possibility that it is a later derived meaning. If Gumgangsik means diamond, then verification of whether it was known as a diamond in India at that time ought to come first. That the original meaning of Gyeomgang is closer to lightning than to Gumgangsik is also shown by the fact that the Vajra said to wield the power of Gyeomgang has a form like that of thunder. The theory that the name Gyeomgangsan is connected with the demudal bodhisattva is rich in documentary records and historical verification, but it is lacking in its explanation of the origin of lightning and diamond, and of the background of the combination of Gyeomgang and San. It requires a more fundamental explanation. The theory that supplements this fundamental explanation is the theory that connects Gyeomgangsan with Mount Sumeru. Meanwhile, if we examine the theory that the origin of the name Gyeomgangsan is related to Mount Sumeru, this theory is in turn divided into the theory that Gyeomgangsan corresponds to the Iron Ring Mountain, in the Buddhist cosmology, represented by the 9 mountains and 8 seas, and the theory that Gyeomgangsan is itself Mount Sumeru. First, if we examine the theory that Gyeomgangsan corresponds to the Iron Ring Mountain in the Buddhist 9 mountains and 8 seas cosmology, this is connected with the Demudal Bodhisattva theory examined above. Changgu and the state preceptor King Yang of the Tang dynasty, who on the basis of the discovered records argued that Gyeomgangsan was a mountain of the Eastern Sea, while annotating the Avatamsaka Sutra, stated that Gyeomgangsan could not be a mountain in the middle of the sea, and was clearly a mountain in the Eastern Sea region. Here, the notion that Gyeomgangsan is a mountain in the middle of the sea points to the Buddhist cosmology, whereby Gyeomgangsan corresponds to the Iron Ring Mountain of the 9 mountains and 8 seas cosmology. There is a theory that regards the Iron Ring Mountains having become today's Gyeomgangsan as due to topographical factors, and to the factor of the faith in Buddhas of the past. As for the topographical factor first, it is said to be because Gyeomgangsan, on the east coast of the Korean peninsula, having much cliff topography and rock, was a beautiful mountain that, viewed from afar, looked like shining, hard stone, that is, like Gyeomgang. In the old days people called this mountain Gyeolsan, but when Chengguan's account was transmitted and spread in our country, people gradually came to believe that the mountain of which Chengguan spoke pointed to precisely this mountain, and in the end began to call this mountain Gyeomgangsan. If we examine records related to the faith and Buddhas of the past, the faith and Buddhas of the past connected with Gyeomgangsan is also rich in traditions other than that of the Demudal Bodhisattva of the Avatamsaka Sutra. The tradition other than that of the Demudal Bodhisattva is the tradition related to the 7 Buddhas of the past. Demudal is a bodhisattva, but the Buddhas of the past are Buddhas on the same level as Sakyamuni. In the Adugira section of the Samyukusa, there is recorded the content in which Godaryang, mother of the Goguryeo monk, Adu Hwadzang, when sending her son Adu to Silla, said, "This Goguryeo does not yet know the Buddhist Dharma, but within the capital of that country, there are 7 temple sites, all of which are temple sites of the age of former Buddhas." In fact, there is a theory that the tribes, including the Sekyu clan, who lived mainly north of the Ganges River, were not Aryan whites, but a yellow race, and, in a broad sense, Mongols. The theory that the Sekyu clan would have been a yellow race was also asserted by 19th-century scholars. Jigong, who founded Hoamsa, also left records related to the 7 Buddhas of the past. Besides the Demudal Bodhisattva, in the 15th year of King Chungsik of Goryeo, the Sun Master Jigong, the 108th Patriarch of India, came to Hoamsa on Chingozan in Nangju, surveyed the temple site, and said, "This is the site of a great monastery from the time of the 7 Buddhas of the ancient world." The content that Gyeomgangsan is related to the Iron Ring Mountain of the Buddhist 9 mountains and 8 seas cosmology also connects with the Trichiliacosm that appears in the legend of the fairy and the woodcutter associated with Gyeomgangsan. The 9 mountains and 8 seas is said to refer, in Buddhist cosmology, to the 9 great mountains including Mount Sumeru that exist upon the Golden Wheel, that is, the great earth within one Sumeru world, the basic unit constituting one cosmos, that is, one Trichiliacosm, together with the 8 great seas surrounding those mountains. In the Durga Agama, the Iron Ring Mountain, the 9th of the Buddhist 9 mountains and 8 seas, appears as the Vajra Ring Mountain. The Buddhist 9 mountains and 8 seas cosmology is said to appear in scriptures such as the Durga Agama Fascicle 18, inches 30, Sutra of the Ages, the Sutra on the Arising of Worlds Fascicle 1, and the Sutra on the Causes and Origins of the Arising of Worlds Fascicle 1, in sectarian Buddhist treatises such as the Abhidharmakosa Fascicle 11, and in Mahayana treatises such as the Yogacarabhumi Sastra. Fascicle 2. It is said that although the order differs somewhat according to each scripture, the point that the Iron Ring Mountain is the 9th mountain does not differ. Among the 9 mountains, excepting the first mountain, Mount Sumeru, which is made of the 4 treasures and 7 treasures, and the 9th mountain, the Iron Ring Mountain, which is made of iron. The remaining 7 mountains are all made of gold, a jewel, and are therefore called the 7 golden mountains. Among the 9 mountains, Mount Sumeru is a single enormous mountain, but the remaining 8 mountains are mountains only in name, and are in reality mountain ranges. When the term Trichiliocosm is taken as the basic unit constituting the cosmos in Buddhist cosmology, Gyeomgangsan's corresponding to the Iron Ring Mountain, the 9th mountain, forms a structure of correspondence with Mount Sumeru. In fact, the theory that Gyeomgangsan is itself Mount Sumeru appeared in later ages. The theory that Gyeomgangsan is not the Iron Ring Mountain, but that Gyeomgangsan itself is Mount Sumeru, was advocated by the late Professor Bing Guangxian. In fact, although no document can be found that directly connects Gyeomgangsan's designation in the Avatamsaka Sutra with cosmology, one may say that the mention of Gyeomgang is associated with Mount Sumeru. Even in Buddhist cosmology, though the Iron Ring Mountain is called the 9th of the 9 mountains, mountains 2 through 8 are all mountains of gold, and only the first, Mount Sumeru, and the 9th, the Iron Ring Mountain, appear as actual mountains. And since in the Yin-Yang and Yijing studies as well the numbers 1 and 9 correspond to each other, there is a theoretical background for Gyeomgangsan possibly being Mount Sumeru. Although the theory that Gyeomgangsan itself is Mount Sumeru may also be inferred from Buddhist cosmology, Professor Bing Guangxian's theory is explained mainly from the historical aspect. The theory of Gyeomgangsan as the center of ancient civilization is the theory of Bing Guangxian, a former professor at Andong University, who is said to have met a mysterious death. After presenting this theory in 2005, Bing Guangxian presents the grounds for his theory of Gyeomgangsan as the center of ancient civilization through a triple method of evidence, documents, remains, and theory. Bing Guangxian graduated from the Graduate School of the Department of Fine Arts at Seoul National University and earned a doctorate in Britain for research on dolmens, and was a world-class dolmen expert. Bing Guangxian says that around 2300 BC, when Dangan and Emperor Yao are said to have founded their states, the existing ancient civilization collapsed through a natural disaster caused by a satellite collision. As appears in the Shanhaijing, the Book of Documents, and the Buddhist scriptures, 10 suns are said to have appeared at that time, but the sun shone only over Gyeomgangsan, while the remaining regions were covered in darkness. As the sunlight gradually spread out with Gyeomgangsan at its center, a new Bronze Age civilization is said to have propagated outward together with cone pattern pottery. The Mount Sumeru of Buddhism and the tales of the Shanhaijing are said to recount events of Gyeomgangsan at that time. The 3 grounds Bing Guangxian presents are first, dolmens as artifacts, second, the Shanhaijing and the Buddhist scriptures as documents, and third, the theory of the fabrication of pyramid dating as theory. Looking first at dolmens, Professor Bing Guangxian says that, since more than 1/2 of the world's dolmens are concentrated in Korea, it is a fact beyond doubt that Korea is the origin of ancient civilization. However, he says that the reason Korea is not recognized as the origin of ancient civilization in the history of ancient civilization is that Britain, taking the excavation of the pyramids as an occasion, raised the chronology of the pyramids by more than 2,000 years, whereby the eras were reversed. The West, he says, thereafter expanded discourse about extraterrestrials. Professor Bien argued that if the age of the pyramids is restored to what it was before the alteration, one can confirm that all ancient relics spread out with Korea's Gyeomgangsan at the center. Here, the author will first present the factual matters concerning Gyeomgangsan, and then discuss the details in the following chapter on the Demuval Bodhisattva. The existing view of Gyeomgangsan regards the origin of Gyeomgangsan as a kind of faith, and sees it as an extension of the idea of the Buddha land that originated in the Silla period. However, the recent re-illumination of Gaia research shows, contrary to the existing view, that Gyeomgangsan may actually be the Gyeomgangsan of the Avatamsaka Sutra. Until now, the theory that Gyeomgangsan is actually the Gyeomgangsan of the Avatamsaka Sutra has been steadily raised. Even if one regards only the records mentioned already from the Three Kingdoms period as factual, there are many records the existing theories that support Bingguang Haiyan's theory that Gyeomgangsan is actually the Gyeomgangsan of the Avatamsaka Sutra are broadly the C theory of the Mahayana figure, Nagarjuna Bodhisattva, and the theory of the maritime propagation of Buddhism, of Professor Louis Lancaster of Harvard University, a renowned authority in world Buddhist studies today. Kang Sang-won argues that in the Oxford Dictionary written by the Sanskrit master William James, Sakyamuni is said to have been of the Dangan people. First, if we examine the C theory of the Mahayana figure Nagarjuna Bodhisattva, it provides an important clue connected with the Bodhisattva rank of the Damodal Bodhisattva. As is well known, Bodhisattva is a representative term of Mahayana Buddhism, and Nagarjuna Bodhisattva is the representative of Mahayana Buddhism. To begin, Mahayana Buddhism presents diverse views on the identity of Buddhism. First of all, in Mahayana Buddhism the scriptures themselves are regarded, so to speak, less as the direct preaching of the Tathagata Sakyamuni spoken of in Hinayana Buddhism, than as a Buddhist way of thinking. The scriptures of Mahayana Buddhism represented by the Heart Sutra, the Avatamsaka Sutra, the Lotus Sutra, the Diamond Sutra, the Chinsugying, and the like never appeared at all in Hinayana Buddhism. Therefore, Amitabha Buddha, Avalokitesvara, and the Buddhas of the past, which newly appeared in Mahayana Buddhism, are of unclear substance in Hinayana Buddhism. It is said that the gods of Hinduism were accepted in Mahayana Buddhism. Nagarjuna Bodhisattva, the source of the Heart Sutra, the Avatamsaka Sutra, the Lotus Sutra, the Diamond Sutra, and the Chinsugying, even said that he had gone to the Dragon Palace of the Sea and brought back these Mahayana scriptures, and the Mahayana Buddhist community all officially acknowledge this. As is well known, Southern Buddhism, which is Hinayana, and Northern Buddhism, which is Mahayana, even differ in their very Buddhist eras. That Nagarjuna Bodhisattva's Sea and Dragon Palace were officially acknowledged by the Mahayana Buddhist community shows that at that time Sea and Dragon Palace were used in a sense different from today's, as a term like Shingok shows, Sea and Dragon Palace are said to have been used at that time to refer to the land of the gentlemen east of China, where Gyeomgangsan is located today. The sea theorists such as Park Young-sik say that Changguan, in the end, rendered the sea of the Avatamsaka Sutra, in the terminology of that time, and interpreted it in like today's sea as the eastern country, thereby interpreting Gyeomgangsan as a mountain of the eastern country. In the end, this shows that already in the time of Mahayana Buddhism saw Mount Sumeru not in India but in the east, where Gyeomgangsan is located, and officially acknowledged that Buddhism came from the east. The points that the Damodal Bodhisattva is a bodhisattva, and that Gyeomgangsan belongs to the Avatamsaka Sutra, a Mahayana scripture, become evidence that the Avatamsaka Sutra itself was already written regarding Gyeomgangsan as the actual Gyeomgangsan of Korea. Therefore the sea theorists argue that the Yuan aristocrats recognized Gyeomgangsan as the Gyeomgangsan of the Avatamsaka Sutra. Next, if we examine the theory of the maritime propagation of Buddhism, of Professor Louis Lancaster of Harvard University, a renowned authority in world Buddhist studies today, the theory of the maritime propagation of Buddhism also demonstrates actual cases for the theory of the sea theorists. Louis Lancaster, director of the project to digitize the world's Buddhist materials, regards the feminization of Buddhist bodhisattvas such as Avalokitesvara as evidence of maritime propagation. Since religion has an affinity with commerce, just as Buddhism was propagated by way of the Silk Road, Buddhism is said to have been propagated by way of maritime trade routes, and because this was more powerful than overland routes, the Buddhist images came to display the femininity that is characteristic of maritime culture. Ha Huango Ketu is connected with the twin fish motif related to maritime culture, and in fact, India and Gyeomgangsan were, like Empress Ha, highly likely to have been connected by sea routes. On the other hand, traditionally sea was, unlike with Louis Lancaster, also regarded as a desert. India and Gyeomgangsan are separated by desert, and the world beyond the desert became, in effect, the Dragon Palace of the land of the gentlemen. There are two difficulties in accepting the existing theory, and recent theories are resolving these difficulties. thereby lending strength to the theory that the Gyam-Gangsan of the Avatamsaka Sutra is actually today's Gyam-Gangsan. Of the two difficulties, the first is whether, if Buddhism arose at Gyam-Gangsan, there are other similar cases and by what principle, and the second is whether there is historical evidence by which Gyam-Gangsan can be interpreted as a center called the Land of the Gentleman. As for the first, the discussion of the principle by which Buddhism could arise at Gyam-Gangsan has appeared in recent discussions related to Gaya, and the second, the documentary evidence, has recently emerged from China's Northwest Project. First, if we examine the first, principal aspect, the tidal flats and rivers of Gaya, and the sun, are said to be the principle of the origin of Buddhism. Among the artifacts recently discovered in Gaya, the ones that draw the most attention are the cauldron and the steamer. The cauldron and steamer also appear at temples related to Maitreya Buddha, represented by Jinpyang, namely Gyam-Sansa, the Opusa, and Bryansa, and the reason the cauldron and steamer draw attention is that the principle of the circulation of water and sun that appears in the cauldron and steamer can become a basis for Buddhism. Whereas the Buddhist principle of transmigration was skewed toward the single lifetime of a human being, ancient, former Buddhism applied transmigration not only to human beings but to all things. The particular attention paid to Gaya in connection with Buddhism on the Korean peninsula is because Gaya was not only the most advanced civilized state of that time, but is also connected with the Gaya of India. The very character bull is said to signify measuring and awakening oneself with bow and arrow toward the sun. In the representative dragon and phoenix culture of Northeast Asia, if the sun and moon as the sun deity symbolize the phoenix, then Venus, which conveys the power of the sun, becomes the principle of the five phases. In antiquity, the serpent signifies the changes of the sun, and fire signifies the circulation of the sun's energy. The light, heat, and humidity that the sun possesses are, respectively. Next, if we examine the documentary aspect, it is that in China's Northwest Project cases in which Dangan is identified with the Yellow Emperor, occur frequently. The Yellow Emperor's being identified with Dangan is that, like Dangan, the Yellow Emperor remained as an immortal. The Yellow Emperor lived more than 400 years, and this is also said to mean that some 400 years later, in the time of Emperor Yao, who was close to being his own great-great-grandson, the Yellow Emperor founded the Land of the Gentleman in the east, as Dangan. Although the debate over the origins of Korean Sundu and Taoism had found no clue toward resolution, an unexpected clue comes to be unraveled through China's Northwest Project. If the Yellow Emperor and Dangan are connected with each other, then the origin of Buddhism is connected with the sun deity, providing a great clue toward resolving the difficult problems of understanding and propagating Buddhism. In the end, the Demuval Bodhisattva, as a discussion of the Buddhism before Buddhism, becomes an occasion to examine Hoamsa. Hoamsa, like Gyam-Gangsan, is a temple that has hitherto received little attention, but leaves very many questions. Although Hoamsa was the largest-scale temple in Korean history, a temple that Jigong, the greatest figure in the international Buddhist community, personally built after giving a prophecy designating it as a place of ascetic practice of a Buddha of the past, and a temple that played a decisive role in Joseon history, it has been examined only from the Buddhist aspect. The point that has hitherto received little attention regarding Hoamsa is the background of its rise to prominence in the early Joseon period. Although the period background against which Hoamsa came to be built as the largest temple in Korean history has been studied, the background against which, after its construction, it came to prominence down into the Joseon period, through the great master Muhik and Taeoyi Sungchai, has hardly been illuminated. The site of Hoamsa is a place that the great master Jigong, who had been an Indian prince, visited, spending some 2 years for the remains of the Demuval Bodhisattva of Gyam-Gangsan, at the urging of Naong and the great master Muhik, who had gone to study in Beijing, China. While Jigong was revered in Beijing as an incarnation of Sakyamuni, and was serving the Yuan royal house, at the site of Hoamsa, Jigong said that this place resembled Suchin Umbulsa, an Indian place of ascetic practice of a Buddha of the past, and in later ages the place where Kasyapa the Buddha preached the Dharma came to be regarded not only as Suchin Umbulsa, but also as the site of Hoamsa. As grounds for this, he called the site of Hoamsa the Three Mountains and Two Waters, consisting of 3 mountains and 2 waters. In the 3 mountains and 2 waters, the 2 waters were identified with the Imjin River, and the Han River, and the 3 mountains with Samgaksan. In fact, today's Hoamsa lies between Shinbozan, Heryongsan, and Wangbangsan, with Pochin and Dongducheon in its surroundings. Although there is also research holding that the very term site of Kasyakubuda is a trace of Dangan, the 3 mountains and 2 waters carries yet more meaning in that it includes not only the sense of an auspicious site, but also the yin-yang and 5 phases concept of Samchin Yarji. That Hoamsa is a monastery site of the age of former Buddhas is said to be the highest status in Korean Buddhism, one that even Bulguksa did not receive in the past. On this point, existing research also holds that Hoamsa's being a monastery site of the age of former Buddhas is an exaggeration of Jigong's words made in order to save Hoamsa, which had fallen into crisis of dissolution after Naong's death. However, Jigong personally designated the site to his disciple Naong, and although it was built by King Gongmin, for some reason it was held in very great importance down to the early Joseon period. This can be understood as an extension of the interpretation of the Damugal Bodhisattva. First, Kasyakubuddha is the 6th of the 7 Buddhas said to appear in the age of Sakyamuni Buddha, the Buddha immediately preceding Sakyamuni. As mentioned above, the very concept of Buddhas of the past is already related to pre-Buddhist culture. Kasyakubuddha appears in Korean ancient history as Gosubwenbuya, and in modern place names to there is the Caspian Sea in the Middle East. That Hoamsa was held in importance down into the Joseon period may be said to involve an intention different from Jigong's intention. Hoamsa is, first of all, connected with the Wikwodo retreat. Like Napoleon's Battle of Waterloo, the decisive occasion of the Wikwodo retreat is said to have been the information reported by the great master Muhik, who had gone to spy on the Yuan dynasty. He was known as the great master Muhik, meaning that he had learned nothing, but in fact, Muhik was of the faction that had studied in Beijing, then the center of the world, and was a figure who served as his masters Jigong and Naong, the greatest intellects of the age. The great master Muhik is identified as the figure who early on met Yi Sungchai, and Plan Joseon. Muhik appears as a figure erudite in ancient history who had the country's name chosen as Joseon, and had the palaces of Seoul, such as Gyeongbodong, built in accordance with astronomy. Muhik is even regarded as being of the Yonghabak clan, a family through which Bak Jisang's Budoji had been transmitted. In the end, Muhik may be seen as having planned the reconstruction of Hoamsa together with Naong, as a scheme for the revival of ancient history. Shinbozan, where Hoamsa is located, is also related to Hangcheon-yeam, the epicenter of the Dangan faith revived from the late Goryeo period. Another link between the great master Muhik and ancient history is a passage of the Mahagyal transmitted at Gyeomsansa. The Mahagyal was originally content about geomancy, and because the great master Muhik is said to have composed it, it is called the Mahagyal. In that text, Chunhuang, Jihuang, Inhuang is mentioned, and it connects Gyeomsansa and Gyeomgangsan by the phrase, the great gold mountain under heaven. The background by which the great master Muhik was able to connect Gyeomgangsan and Hoamsa is said to have taken as its precedent the past connecting by Jaejang of Korea's Odaesan with the Odaesan of the Indian Bodhisattva, Manjusri. In particular, he is also said to have emphasized the point that, whereas Odaesan was aristocratic, Gyeomgangsan was popular. To the extent that the great master Muhik showed an obsession with the revival of ancient history, the Gyeomgangsan of Korean ancient history has undergone ups and downs since the age of the Yellow Emperor, Dangan. The thunder faith of Gyeomgangsan was transmitted to China as the thunder magic faith, and the principle of the sun and Venus was propagated as yin-yang, and the 5 phases. The sun and Venus, as the origin of the dragon and phoenix culture, are such that the movement of the sun relates to the phoenix through yin-yang, and the movement of Venus relates to the 5 phases, and hence to the dragon. This is found today, even in the Sumerian Middle East, and in America. The place name Hoamsa too would be related to the fir tree, but it emphasizes the tree, wood, as in Dangan. What connects Gyeomsansa with Gyeomgangsan is the Battle of Baeksan River in 663, before the founding of Gyeomsansa. The Battle of Baeksan River seems to have concluded at the winter solstice of 663, a sexagenary cycle day that comes around once every 1980 years. The Battle of Baeksan River, the last Battle of Baekje, was the first international war in East Asia, in which the Silla-Tang allied forces defeated the Baekje Goguryeo Japan allied states. That a battle centered on the small Baekje in the western part of today's Korean peninsula is called an international war, is because, it is said, the history of Baekje, which at that time had a chance of victory in fighting the Tang dynasty, has undergone much distortion today. Baekje was defeated by Silla, but in the ensuing battle between Silla and Tang, it sided with Silla and repelled the Tang. Thereafter the maritime kingdom technology of Baekje contributed to Silla's inheriting the land of the gentleman image of Gojoseon. Japan's Kyushu calls to mind the 9 provinces culture of Dangan. In commemoration of Baekje, Gyeomsansa was built, and Maitreya was erected by Jinpyo, who had built Gyeomsansa on Gyeomgangsan, connected with Gyeomsansa. The phrase after the heavenly, earthly, and human sovereigns, the great gold mountain under heaven, that appears in the great master Muth's Mahagyal, can be understood in the same context. If we reinterpret Bingwang Haiyan's theory, the Battle of Baeksan River was a battle possessing the principle whereby the peoples who had spread out with Gyeomgangsan at their center once again returned to the origin. The dragon and phoenix culture that sprouted in our country, which had the largest tidal flats in the world in the age of Fixie, before 4000 BC, spread out to all parts of the world. These peoples formed the Sumerians, the Aryans, and the Slavs, and after each living separately, gathered again at Gyeomgangsan, owing to climate change. Traces of that time remain even in Africa, and there is also research holding that the language most similar to modern Korean is Kinyarwanda of Africa. Jang Hyungjin says that the people who first began to return again to the Korean peninsula at that time were the Gwanggang people of the Shenong lineage. O Gwangil regards this Gwanggang people as of the Sumerian lineage. Jang Hyungjin says that the second to migrate were the Hwanin people, who had the bear totem, and that Dangan too is connected with them. O Gwangil regards these as the Aryans and says that the Aryans had the bear totem. Combining with the bear totem people who were already there, they are said to have had conflict with the tiger totem. In the West, Lukyuri, who wrote The Emperor Who Came from Babylonia, and Luo Binji and Kim Jae-sup, who analyzed records of the bronze inscriptions, explain this period in detail. Again, according to Bingwang Haiyan's theory, owing to the climate change that appears in the records of the time of Emperor Yao, the former civilization fell, and the representative races of the world's population gathered at Gyeomgangsan. At that time the sunlight shone only on Gyeomgangsan, and that sunlight gradually broadened so that the Gyeomgangsan civilization spread out again, this being, it is said, the migration of comb pattern pottery and dolmens. Through this, world civilization was revived once more, and reached the axial age. That the Venus goddess Venus Astartes distributed in the Middle East has its reason here. The Battle of Baeksan River may be seen as the defeat of the Gyeomgangsan civilization, when the civilization that had left Gyeomgangsan returned once again. Thereafter Korean history maintained a level of national strength sufficient to guard Gyeomgangsan. Even today North Korea is, unintentionally, playing the role of guarding Gyeomgangsan. In geomantic theory it is said that the earth energy too must be guarded if it is to be manifested in the right place at the right time. Muhik, who was as versed in geomancy as in Buddhism, joined forces with Yi Sungchai in the restoration of ancient history, and this can be regarded as the background of Hoamsa's rise to prominence. That the place Yi Sungchai chose to practice asceticism, even after the strife of the princes, was Hoamsa, and that he had it built in a style like that of a royal palace, shows his will for the restoration of ancient history. In fact, throughout the Joseon dynasty this will for restoration was expressed internally, and it is said that in the time of King Gozong, when King was defeated in the Sino-Japanese War, they sought to restore ancient history by restoring the octagonal pavilions throughout the country. In the Joseon period, after Yodok, the representative of the Westerners faction, wrote a piece about Gyeomgangsan, Jusis Wuinime Bens came to be sought at Gyeomgangsan. Thereafter Gyeomgangsan became a popular faith, as seen in the poetry of Kim Satgat.